toughest actors in Hollywood history. Hollywood has always sold us the image of toughness, gunslingers, war heroes, street fighters, men who could stare down death without flinching. But here's the twist. Some of those actors weren't just pretending. They weren't relying on choreographed fights or studio myths. They had already lived through more danger and hardship than most of us can imagine. These weren't just actors. They were survivors, soldiers, brawlers, men shaped by poverty, war, and near-death experiences long before the cameras ever rolled. And today we're peeling back the curtain to reveal the truth about the 10 toughest actors in Hollywood history. From a baby-faced war hero who killed hundreds before he was 21, to a movie star who carried a gun after finding his name on the Manson family's hit list, every story here is more jaw-dropping than the last. Let's dive in. When you think tough Hollywood actor, maybe you picture John Wayne, Clint Eastwood, or Charles Bronson. But the toughest man ever to stand in front of a movie camera was barely 5'5", had the face of a teenager, and looked like he belonged in a school play rather than a battlefield. Murphy wasn't just tough, he was lethal. By the time he was 19, he was already the most decorated American soldier of World War II. One of his most famous exploits came in January 1945, when he single-handedly held off an entire company of German soldiers for over an hour. Out of ammunition, wounded, and surrounded, Murphy climbed onto a burning tank destroyer and used its mounted machine gun until it finally jammed from the heat. Then he led a counterattack that drove the enemy back. For that act alone, he was awarded the Medal of Honor. But that was just one story. By the time he was discharged, Murphy had earned every U.S. combat award for valor plus several foreign medals, 28 in total, all before his 21st birthday. Historians estimate he personally killed between 240 and 300 enemy soldiers. Now here's where Hollywood comes in. After his war fame landed him on the cover of Life magazine, producers wanted him on screen. But there was a problem. He looked too innocent. When he showed up for his first audition, security guards refused to believe this baby-faced kid was the legendary war hero. Murphy eventually told his story in the autobiographical film To Hell and Back, where he played himself. But even then, the studio had to cut out parts of his real-life feats because audiences would have thought they were too unrealistic. Imagine being so heroic that the truth seems fake. Behind the camera, Murphy battled nightmares, paranoia, and post-war trauma. He kept a loaded pistol under his pillow and often woke up drenched in sweat, reaching for a weapon. His wife later admitted he had two sides. In public, he was soft-spoken and gentle, but in private, the instincts of a hardened killer sometimes surfaced. And yet, he never bragged about his toughness. He didn't want to play fighters or war heroes. He preferred lighthearted roles. Still, history makes it clear, no other Hollywood actor ever walked onto a set with more real-life kills than Audie Murphy. But while Murphy's toughness came from war, the next actors came from something more grinding. Charles Bronson's face was his resume. That hard, weathered expression wasn't makeup. It was the product of a life spent in pain. Born Charles Buczynski, he grew up in Pennsylvania coal country as one of 15 children. His family was so poor that by the time he was 10, Bronson was already working deep underground in the mines. He later admitted, "We lived with death, starvation, and misery." That environment shaped him into someone who didn't flinch at suffering, because suffering was all he knew. Then came World War II. Bronson served as a B-29 gunner, flying 25 missions over Japan. He was wounded in battle and awarded a Purple Heart. Fellow servicemen remembered him as unnervingly calm under fire, the guy you wanted next to you when everything went wrong. When he came back, success didn't arrive overnight. Bronson worked more than 50 different jobs: onion picker, cook, even professional boxer, before acting gave him a path out. But even then, he wasn't cast as a glamorous leading man. Hollywood saw his intimidating look and slotted him into roles as thugs, convicts, or hired guns. And the truth is, he played them too well, because he knew exactly how violence worked. Unlike most actors, Bronson performed his own fight scenes. No choreographed dance moves. When he threw a punch, it looked like a real fight. Fast, ugly, and efficient. His co-stars described his grip as vice-like. One actor remembered Bronson grabbing his shirt during a scene and realizing he couldn't break free. That wasn't acting. That was strength built in coal mines and boxing gyms. And here's where his toughness really showed. After playing vigilante Paul Kersey in Death Wish, Bronson started receiving threats from organized crime. The studio panicked and offered him bodyguards. Bronson declined. "I've lived too long and been through too much to worry about people like that," he said. In an industry full of men pretending to be dangerous, Bronson simply was. But while Bronson had the face of a man who'd suffered, the next actor carried the scars of war, literally. Marvin was one of those rare actors who didn't need to prove anything. His presence alone was enough to shift the energy in a room, and that aura came from experience most men would never survive. As a Marine in World War II, Marvin fought in the Battle of Saipan, one of the bloodiest campaigns in the Pacific. He was hit by machine gun fire that tore through his back and leg, severing his sciatic nerve. He was only 20 years old. The wound nearly killed him and left him hospitalized for a year. He carried a limp for the rest of his life, though he learned to disguise it on screen. Marvin didn't romanticize war. When people asked about it, he was brutally honest. "I was a Marine sniper in the Pacific. I got shot in the ass and sent home." Any man who says he enjoyed combat is either a liar or a fool. That kind of raw honesty seeped into his acting. When Marvin played violent men in films like The Dirty Dozen, it wasn't performance, it was memory. He understood how violence really worked. Sudden, ugly, and without Hollywood flair. His reputation off-screen matched the legend. Once, while filming in Oregon, Marvin got into a bar fight with an entire crew of lumberjacks. He was in his 40s, outnumbered, and still held his own until the police broke it up. The next morning, he arrived on set bruised but ready to work, refusing medical help. Co-stars admitted they felt uneasy around him. James Coburn himself, a tough guy actor, once said, "When Lee walked into a room, everyone straightened up. There was something genuinely dangerous about him you couldn't quite explain." And yet Marvin wasn't just fists and fights. He was a thoughtful man, widely read, able to switch from discussing Hemingway to demonstrating how to disable an opponent. That mix of intellect and danger made him unlike anyone else. But Hollywood's next tough guy took danger to a whole new level. In fact, his off-screen stunts sometimes terrified the very directors trying to keep him alive. Steve McQueen was the ultimate movie star of the 1960s and 70s, known as the King of Cool. But behind the sunglasses and swagger, he was a real-life daredevil who lived on the edge every single day. McQueen's childhood was rough: abandonment, abuse, and trouble with the law. By 14, he had run away and was living on the streets. Later, he joined the Marines, where his rebellious streak almost got him kicked out. He was demoted 7 times, spent over a month in the brig, and still managed to redeem himself by saving 5 Marines from drowning during an Arctic exercise. After his discharge, he drifted through odd jobs: lumberjack, oil rigger, carnival barker. But danger kept calling. He became obsessed with motorcycles and cars, eventually racing professionally under fake names to keep studios from finding out. Unlike other actors who faked action scenes, McQueen really lived them. During The Great Escape, he performed most of his own motorcycle stunts, including the high-speed chases. Insurance wouldn't let him do the legendary fence jump, but everything else was all him. And when he wasn't on set, he was competing against professional racers. In the 1970 12 Hours of Sebring, he and his co-driver came in second place, despite McQueen racing with a cast on his broken foot. Danger followed him to movie sets. On the sand pebbles, he nearly drowned in a raging river. On the towering Inferno, he did stunts surrounded by real fire. Director John Sturges admitted the hardest part about working with McQueen wasn't convincing him to do a stunt, it was trying to stop him from doing something suicidal. But the most shocking story? When police revealed that McQueen's name was on Charles Manson's hit list, his response wasn't to hire security. Instead, he started carrying a loaded Magnum revolver everywhere. If someone came for him, he'd handle it himself. Professional racer Mario Andretti summed it up best. Hollywood had actors who played tough guys. Steve actually was one. And while McQueen chased danger, the next actor proved that toughness didn't just come from risk, it could be forged in willpower alone. Kirk Douglas, born Isser Danielovich, didn't just survive hardship, he fought through it with relentless determination. He grew up in extreme poverty, the son of Jewish immigrants, often going hungry as a child. To escape, he wrestled, literally. His skill earned him a scholarship to college, where his grit and physicality became his ticket out of poverty. Then came the Navy. Douglas served as a communications officer aboard a submarine chaser during World War II, where constant threats of torpedoes and depth charges tested his nerves. An injury eventually forced his discharge, but his fighting spirit carried over into acting. On set, Douglas was a force of nature. For Spartacus, he trained with real wrestlers and gladiators. He once performed a dangerous fall that sidelined him with injuries, yet he was back just 2 days later. But his toughest battles came later in life. In 1991, Douglas was in a helicopter crash that killed 2 people and left him with a debilitating back injury. He fought through rehab until he could walk again. Then in 1996, a stroke left him struggling to speak. Most men his age would have given up. Douglas fought back, relearning speech, and even writing a book about his recovery. As Burt Lancaster once said, Kirk doesn't perform a scene, he attacks it. That summed up his whole life. But while Douglas embodied iron will, the next man proved that toughness doesn't come from size, it comes from what you do with it. James Cagney stood just 5'5", but in Hollywood, few men were tougher. Raised on the rough streets of New York's Lower East Side, Cagney grew up fighting. Boxing wasn't a sport for him, it was survival. His lightning-fast hands and quick footwork helped him win fights against bigger opponents, lessons that carried straight into his acting. That's why Cagney's movie brawls look so real. He wasn't mimicking punches, he'd thrown dozens of them in his youth. Directors noticed the difference immediately. His fights were quick, brutal, and efficient, just like real street fights. One famous moment in The Public Enemy says it all. When he smashed a grapefruit into a woman's face, it wasn't staged, she wasn't warned, her shocked reaction was genuine. Cagney's reputation was clear. You didn't mess with him. Bob Hope once said, Jimmy was the kind of guy who'd knock you down and then help you up. And yet Cagney wasn't just fists. He was also a skilled dancer, which gave him balance, agility, and explosive movement that made him one of the most captivating performers of his time. But if Cagney was small and fast, the next man was massive, a literal giant who turned physical endurance into his trademark. John Wayne was more than a Hollywood cowboy. He was a mountain of a man, 6'4", with the kind of presence that dominated every set. Before acting, he was a football star at USC. He worked as a prop man in early Hollywood, hauling equipment so heavy that other workers needed teams to move it. Wayne carried that physical power into his career, performing his own stunts well into middle age. On the Alamo, he broke ribs during a horse fall, got them taped, and kept filming. On The Greatest Story Ever Told, he tore shoulder ligaments, refused to stop, and finished the scene. Perhaps his greatest test came off screen. While filming The Conqueror, Wayne and his crew were unknowingly exposed to radioactive fallout from nuclear testing. Decades later, nearly half of the crew developed cancer. Wayne himself lost a lung and several ribs to the disease, yet he returned to doing his own stunts just months later. Director Henry Hathaway recalled asking Wayne to use a double after surgery. Wayne stared him down and said, "Either I do my own stunts, or you find someone else for the part." End of discussion. Whatever you thought of his politics, no one could deny Wayne's physical toughness. But toughness wasn't always about size or stunts. For some actors, it was about sheer survival against a brutal world. Not every tough guy looked the same. For some, toughness meant surviving the streets. For others, it meant carrying the weight of history. Robert Mitchum grew up poor, orphaned young, and lived as a hobo riding freight trains. He fought as a boxer, got arrested for vagrancy, and served time on a Georgia chain gang. When he became an actor, he didn't need to fake toughness. It was written all over his face. His effortless cool wasn't acting, it was survival made visible. Anthony Quinn was born during the Mexican Revolution, fled with his family to the US, and worked brutal jobs as a kid: butcher, laborer, boxer. His strength was so real that on film sets, he'd carry loads that normally took 2 men. Yet Quinn also showed vulnerability on screen, comfortable with both toughness and emotion. That balance made him magnetic. Charlton Heston was a different kind of tough. A Second World War gunner, he built his legend by pushing his body through almost superhuman endurance. In Ben-Hur, he performed the chariot race himself, narrowly avoiding disaster. On The 10 Commandments, he endured desert conditions that hospitalized crew members. And beyond films, Heston showed moral toughness, marching with Martin Luther King Jr. in the 60s, and later standing firm in his political convictions, no matter the backlash. 3 men, 3 different kinds of toughness, all unforgettable. What ties all of these men together is simple. Their toughness didn't come from scripts, cameras, or studio myths. It came from real life, from wars, poverty, survival, pain, and choices that would break most people. When you watch their films today, you can sense the difference. The punches land harder, the stares cut deeper, because they weren't pretending. they were remembering. The question is, could Hollywood ever produce actors like this again? Or has that era passed for good? I'll let you decide. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Which one of these legends impressed you the most? And if you enjoyed this dive into old Hollywood's toughest icons, don't forget to hit like and subscribe for more stories from the golden age of cinema.